Okay, let's dive right into this. Picture the scene. It's the evening of August 15th, 1590. The dark, churning waters of the Pamlico Sound are just getting battered by a brewing Atlantic storm. Through the fading twilight, Governor John White is staring out at the stormy Carolina coast. For 3 agonizing years, he's been completely separated from his family, his daughter, his son-in-law, and his infant granddaughter. He has finally made it back to the Roanoke colony with emergency supplies. He actually sees a column of smoke rising through the trees, which gives him this massive spark of hope that his people are alive. But when he finally steps ashore, the path is completely overgrown, and there is just this eerie, heavy silence hanging over the whole island.
But here's the thing. When White reaches the settlement, he doesn't find a massacre. Instead, he walks right into a baffling crime scene. The houses haven't been burned down, they've actually been carefully dismantled and replaced by a formidable palisade of heavy tree trunks built up like a fortress. And on one of the chief entry posts of this fort, carved super clearly right into the bark, is a single word: CROATOAN. Now, before he had left for England, White had strictly instructed the colonists that if they were ever in distress or had to flee an attack, they were to carve a Maltese cross above their destination. White searches the wood frantically. And the absolute crucial detail here is, there is no cross.
It's the ultimate question, isn't it? How do 115 men, women, and children simply vanish into thin air? For centuries, this has been framed as a spooky campfire myth, a tale of people just magically evaporating into the Carolina mists. But today, in this explainer, we are treating this exactly like a cold case investigation. We are officially moving past the folklore. We're going to look at the real historical motives, the context, and the actual modern archaeological forensics that are finally shedding light on America's most enduring historical enigma.
Section 1. The Roots of the Tragedy. Now, to understand the disappearance, we have to rewind a bit and look at why the English were even on this dangerous coast to begin with.
You see, this wasn't just about innocent exploration. This was a high-stakes geopolitical chess match. Back in the late 16th century, Spain was the undisputed global superpower, funding a massive military machine with all that New World wealth. Queen Elizabeth knew England absolutely had to challenge this monopoly. So, in 1584, she grants Sir Walter Raleigh a charter. By 1585, Raleigh sends Ralph Lane over to establish a military garrison. And then just 2 years later, in 1587, John White arrives with a completely different kind of group, a civilian colony.
And this brilliantly illustrates where everything started to go wrong. Look at the contrast here. The 1585 expedition, that was just a military camp of 108 hot-tempered soldiers. They were aggressive, they were obsessed with finding gold, and they relied entirely on the local native populations to feed them. Get this, when a single English silver cup went missing, the military commander literally burned the entire native village of Aquascogok to the ground, over a cup. In one stroke, they turned hospitable neighbors into bitter enemies. So by the time John White's vulnerable 1587 civilian colony of farmers, women, and kids actually shows up, they are stepping into a violently hostile environment created entirely by the soldiers who came before them.
Section 2. Trapped by a war. And here is where a bad situation turns into an absolute disaster.
The ultimate tragedy is that these 1587 colonists were never even supposed to be at Roanoke. Their intended destination was the much safer, deeper waters of the Chesapeake Bay further north. But their pilot, a privateer named Simon Fernandez, basically forced them to disembark at Roanoke because he was in a rush to get back to hunting Spanish treasure ships. So these 115 civilians are suddenly stranded in a war zone. Despite the tension, there were these fleeting moments of hope, like on August 18, 1587, with the birth of Virginia Dare, literally the first English child born in the New World. But the hope didn't last. Shortly after, a colonist is killed by native warriors while he's out crabbing. The situation goes downhill so fast that the colonists literally draw up a signed document, practically begging Governor White to sail back to England for emergency supplies.
White reluctantly agrees and heads back. And here is the number that completely sealed their fate: 3. 3 excruciating years. Because the second White returned to England, King Philip II of Spain was assembling the massive Spanish Armada to invade. Queen Elizabeth immediately issued a stay of shipping. That meant every single seaworthy vessel was dragooned into military service to defend England. No way around it, not a single ship was allowed to leave for the New World. So John White was completely blocked from returning, leaving his family and 115 civilians totally stranded for 3 full years.
Section 3. 4 Theories of Survival.
Let's fast forward back to that empty fort in 1590, put on our detective hats, and figure out where these people actually went.
Think of this as our detective's corkboard. We've got 4 major theories, and we can actually confidently dismiss the bottom 2 right out of the gate. The Spanish threat? Well, the Spanish archives in Seville are incredibly meticulous, and there is absolutely zero record of them ever finding or engaging this colony. The Chesapeake slaughter? This was a story Chief Powhatan told decades later to the Jamestown settlers, claiming he wiped them out. But there's zero archaeological proof for it, and historians now believe the Virginia Company likely completely fabricated this story to scare new settlers away from assimilating with natives. So that leaves us with 2 highly probable real leads: the Hatteras assimilation and the inland migration.
But before we look at the actual evidence, we gotta clear away the noise. You might have heard of the famous Dare stones. Back in 1937, a guy named Lewis Hammond claimed he found a carved stone from Eleanor Dare, detailing the colony's tragic journey. Right after that, a stone cutter named Bill Eberhart magically produced 47 more of these diary stones to collect reward money. It caused a massive national sensation. That is, until 1940, when investigative journalists completely exposed Eberhart as a con artist who was just using modern steel chisels. Yeah, not exactly 16th century tools. So we're tossing out the 20th century con artists and relying strictly on modern archaeological science.
Section 4. Clues beneath the soil. This is where the forensic breakthroughs of the last few decades get incredibly exciting.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this stuff called hammer scale. Archaeologists digging down on Hatteras Island, which was the home of the friendly CROATOAN tribe, found layers of earth dating right to the late 16th century, and in those layers they found hammer scale. Why is that a game changer? Because Native Americans at this time absolutely did not have iron smelting or blacksmithing technology. Finding hammer scale right inside a native village is definitive proof that English blacksmiths were living, working, and hammering metal right there alongside the CROATOAN people.
And they didn't just find microscopic metal flakes. Dig teams literally unearthed parts of English rapier hilts, lead shot, and, get this, a 10-carat gold signet ring bearing an English nobleman's crest. All of it mixed perfectly in with native clay cooking pots. It's like the pieces of a giant puzzle snapping together. Tree ring data shows that between 1587 and 1589, this specific region suffered its worst drought in 800 years. The colonists couldn't grow food. They desperately needed help. All of this forensic evidence strongly supports the theory that a huge chunk of the colony did exactly what they carved on that post. They went to Hatteras, joined their allies, and assimilated just to survive that brutal drought.
But wait, that might not be the whole story. Remember the inland migration theory? This part plays out literally like a heist movie. In 2012, researchers at the British Museum were analyzing John White's original 1585 watercolor map of the coast. They noticed these 2 tiny paper patches pasted over the map. For years, people assumed they were just corrections to drawing errors, but when they used modern imaging and backlit the map, boom! They discovered a hidden fort symbol drawn in red and silver ink right under the patch, and it was located exactly 50 miles inland, perfectly matching a relocation plan the colonists had actually discussed before White ever left for England.
This cartographic clue was literally an X on a treasure map. It led archaeologists right to a location at Salmon Creek in North Carolina, which they obviously dubbed Site X. When they excavated, they found exactly what they were looking for: fragments of yellow-glazed English borderware. This highly specific pottery was used heavily by the Roanoke colonists, but was completely phased out and no longer imported by the time later colonies like Jamestown were settled. Finding it 50 miles inland strongly suggests that while some colonists went south to Hatteras, a splinter group packed up their stuff and established a secondary, hidden settlement inland to escape Spanish patrols.
Section 5. Assimilation, not disappearance. It's time we bring this investigation to a close and completely change the vocabulary of this story from lost to survived.
Here's the reality. Those 115 colonists didn't just passively sit in a wooden fort waiting for starvation to take them, and they certainly didn't evaporate. They adapted. They took their tools, their families, and their kids. They learned from Mantio's people how to harvest oysters, how to spear fish, and how to actually grow corn in that sandy soil. They melted into the local Algonquian tribes. In fact, over a century later, European explorers in the region would completely marvel at native communities who possessed an uncanny familiarity with the English language, had a tradition of reading from books, and who shared physical traits like fair hair and blue eyes.
So, I want to leave you with this final thought. What if America's first English citizens actually survived by ceasing to be English? The mystery of Roanoke isn't some spooky ghost story. It's a profound story of human resilience.
It's about real people, abandoned by their home country, who, by pure necessity and grace, became deeply intertwined with the land and the indigenous people they originally sought to conquer.
Please like and subscribe.